much, and I'll try to be brief, although that's always tough for an economist to do. We have too many hands. It's always on one hand or the other. I'll tell you a little bit about me and what we do. I am the director of the Center for Economic Research at the University of Wisconsin-River Falls, and one of our key missions is economic development through business outreach, particularly providing a link to the types of skills that we have at the university to the needs that exist within the community. And particularly what I do is I try to make a lot of the information that's available, similar to what the first speaker does in the banking industry, that's actually available out there but just really hard to find, and make it in a way that's hopefully presentable for a non-economist to consume. We produce a report which is in your packet once a month. This is available on our website, as well as several other products that we have on our website. We've recently just completely rebuilt the website to include a number of data products that can actually be embedded into your website. So should you need some kind of real-time dashboarding type stuff on your web, you can contact me and we can try to work something out there that might be possible. So in that vein, I cheated a little bit on this presentation and copied some of the stuff out of my website in the idea that what I'm doing is I'm showing off my website. But what I'm really doing is just cheating, and I did it there, and so it's easier than redoing it entirely for PowerPoint. But one of the problems with doing presentations like this is already out of date. So today the BEA actually just released preliminary numbers for fourth quarter 2012, and unfortunately, well, let's go with the good news. The good news is they revised the numbers for for quarter three up. We had a seasonally adjusted annual growth rate of 3.1% nationally in quarter three, but unfortunately for quarter four we had a slight decrease, 0.1%. That's probably not significantly different from zero. My guess, mostly based on it's better to be an optimist and a fool than a pessimist and right, is that number will be revised up, but it's still quite a bit lower than certainly I was hoping for. When we take a look at a few other figures looking at the national level, one thing that I find quite encouraging over this time period is capacity utilization. It's getting closer. I mean, we're seeing year-over-year changes, positive over the last 6 months. We're beginning to flirt with that 80% level if we look at over about the last 20 years. Better times, non-recession times, expansionary times, we're somewhere between that 80 and 85% in capacity utilization. So hopefully as we go forward, we'll start to see getting up into that range. That will certainly signal to me a little more recovery. Philadelphia Fed also publishes a leading index I'm sure you guys are aware of, and they're calling for reasonably tepid growth over the next 6 months. It's certainly not anything to write home about, but at least not contraction. Looking at nationally inflationary pressures, I see none. All these indicators are looking to me that at least in the short run, we don't seem to have an issue with inflation, so I don't see anything earth-shattering coming out of the Fed's meetings today. Going forward, we may see something. We're going to see some changes somewhat soon. What is soon? I don't know. Next 18 months, something is going to change, hopefully, particularly as the economy begins to recover. Looking overall, labor markets, we're seeing nationally, we've created jobs over the last year. Not as many as we would like, but we have certainly seen this rate of decrease in the unemployment rate is very, very similar to the rate of decrease we saw in response to the recession in 2001. So we're seeing, while this last recession was considerably more severe, we're seeing about the same recovery rate. Looking a little more close to home, looking at the state level, overall, you have to take these leading indexes that the Philadelphia Fed puts out with a bit of a grain of salt because they are quite volatile. And we're looking 6-month growth rates pretty anemic for both Wisconsin and Minnesota. Wisconsin this month's a little better. Other months, Minnesota turns out a little better. these are rough estimates. They're based on four different models, and they use a kind of cool state-space model type way to forecast. But there's still an awful lot of volatility in that, and so it's a peek ahead, but we have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt. Bringing it even more local, let's look at the actual St. Croix Valley. And I define the St. Croix Valley as 4 counties here on the Wisconsin side and 3 counties on the Minnesota side. And it makes up a pretty fair chunk of the Minneapolis-St. Paul-Bloomington MSA. Of course, not all of, I don't believe Dunn is, and not all of St. Croix, Polk, and Pierce counties either are in the MSA. But roughly, it makes a decent chunk. And as far as unemployment rates go, we see a couple things here. First of all, we see that the St. Croix Valley on the Wisconsin side is certainly doing better than the state average, which goes right along with something we've known for a long time. St. Croix Valley, particularly St. Croix County, is one of the fastest growing counties in Wisconsin, and they're certainly doing quite well relative to the state average. We broaden this out to a little bit bigger area around here, and we'll see several counties as we go a little farther east that aren't doing as well. But for this area right along the river, definitely better. We also see similar better performance, although a little bit higher unemployment rates on the Minnesota side. We could probably think of some demographic reasons for that, but we'll continue. We'll also see Minnesota has historically been doing just a little bit better, recovering just a little bit faster than Wisconsin. Taking a look at national job creation, so let's just kind of continue to look at the labor markets. I don't know if this graph is right or not. I kind of like it. I'm still not convinced. I'm not making a huge mistake here. But what I did was basically I say, how many jobs do we create over the year? So how many jobs do we create in January? How many jobs do we create in January and February? And then just cumulative over the year. And overall, nationally, we've created almost, and this is in thousands, so it's actually millions. So we've created a number of jobs. Not enough, of course, to bring us back to where we were, say, pre-recession levels as far as employment. But again, we're seeing a job creation rate and a growth rate very similar to that that we saw in response to 2001. Breaking this down by state, looking at the different sectors, I find the report this month to be a little bit unremarkable. Notice December, that's the latest data that's available. State data is always roughly 2 months out of date. So we're almost the end of January, and so we have December data finally. The thing that I want to note the most in this is on the Wisconsin side, I was a bit surprised by this number when we look at construction. And I think I'll come back to that when I talk about the housing market and a little bit of what I think might be going on in the housing market. Although when I talk about the housing market to a group of community bankers, I do so with fear and trembling because you probably have all forgotten more about the housing market in this area than I will ever know. Taking a look, splitting this out by state job creation, Minnesota's created about 51,000, 52,000 jobs. Clearly not a steady increase that we saw in the national level, but definitely net positive for the year. Wisconsin has not fared as well. We've had some significant setbacks, particularly in the middle of the year. There's probably a number of opinions. What's the difference between Wisconsin and Minnesota? We could look to right here and talk about some of the political unrest that happened and some of the uncertainty that happened around that, and maybe that's something causing this. Or we might be a little more cynical about it, like I am, and say, well, Minnesota's got more of the Twin Cities than we do. Because of those, of the jobs that have been created, if we look in both areas, about 25,000, almost 26,000 overall for the year is in the Minneapolis-St. Paul Bloomington MSA. Now, that number is a little bit difficult to interpret when we start looking at comparing states because a good portion of those jobs are on the Wisconsin side as well as the Minnesota side. So not all of that MSA is in Minnesota. So, we can't just take 25,000 jobs off of the Minnesota rate and say that's what's created outside of the Twin Cities. But we can see this is a major economic engine for this part of the world, and we can see, well, why is St. Croix County growing faster than any other county in Wisconsin? Well, this has a lot to do with that. All right, taking a look at, I'm gonna go ahead and skip this part for brevity's sake, and I want to talk a little bit about the housing market. And generally, on the housing market, I'm cautiously optimistic. The first thing that makes me cautiously optimistic is I'm starting to see, and we're starting to see over the last, and I'm going to move that because I'm going to keep hitting that one. We're starting to see consistent increases in employment in the construction sector. All right? When construction companies are hiring, when we're having more construction hiring, well, that strikes me that we've got some agents that are looking forward with some expectation of at least not gloom and doom. Now, that's not strong evidence to say we're going to go back to the early 2000s, but I still am cautiously optimistic. I'm also seeing in the data a little more closely linked, all right, a little closer, the list price and the actual sale price. All right, so what that's telling me is, at the very least, sellers are starting to, well, psychologically accept the new housing market conditions. And then finally, I'm seeing time on the market come down a little bit. We're also seeing inventories come down a little bit. We're seeing number of homes sold staying fairly steady. We're seeing price level going up. In fact, the Case-Shiller Home Price Index just released latest statistics. So I'm going to show you Case-Shiller in just a second, but this is already out of date. We've got another quarter released, where 19 of the 20 cities that they study all had increases in price level. All right, so housing price went up in 19 of the 20 cities they look at. The only city that it did not was New York. And, well, their price is already too high anyway, so it's okay if they don't go up. No, I'm kidding. In any event, that's the strongest showing we've had in that really since the housing market collapsed. So there's a lot of good signs on the horizon as far as the housing market and recovery. I know room full of bankers showing interest rates is always dangerous. I'm an economist, and I'm a monetary economist, and so I look at that and think, wow, that's about the most boring graph I think I've ever seen. But you see, you know, it's like when you work with a medical doctor. He only starts to get interesting in you when you're about to die. I mean, you know, something has to be wrong before it's actually interesting. But that you know, nice upward sloping yield curve looks like about what it should mid recovery. Again, we've had. It seems like we take one step forward, one or two steps forward, and we take a step back. I don't know what's going on with the fourth quarter. I was surprised when I heard today that those preliminary numbers come out. Now, those are preliminary, so they will be revised. And my guess, I guess I'm crossing my fingers, is they will be revised up, mostly because they seem pretty low, especially for fourth quarter. But there's also some reasons for that. I think one of the biggest threats we have going forward as far as continued economic recovery is continued uncertainty. We're really getting to a point with policy that we need policymakers just to make it, good or bad or indifferent, do something, and that's going to be better than this nebulous somewhere in the middle. Maybe we'll default on our debt, maybe we won't. Maybe we'll have a budget, maybe we won't. This uncertainty that's going on, I think if we ever get past that, that's one of the key things holding us back. Longer term, particularly when we're talking about interest rates and within the banking sector, longer term we have a huge amount of reserves in circulation right now. But we've seen that as a response to essentially a collapse in the money multiplier. Now, as that comes back to a new normal, whatever that new normal comes up to, I would assume that a money multiplier will become back more to a historical average. Something will have to be done with those reserves, and that could pose some significant downside risk, say over the next 2 to 3 years, I would think. But currently, I don't see any change in Fed policy. I don't see that we'll get any surprises later today when they announce the results of their meeting. And I don't see interest rates changing in the next 3 to 6 months. Too much, hopefully. Hopefully I kept that short and sweet so we wouldn't keep you too long.